Well, hello, lovely listeners. Welcome to episode 155 of the Assist with Impact podcast. And I am delighted this week to be bringing you my interview with Ursula Kohler, the founder and director of Capital EA. Let me tell you a little bit about Ursula. Ursula is challenge-driven and thrives in busy environments. With over 25 years' experience as an EA/PA, Ursula has worked for and with some of Australia's most recognised and rewarded individuals. Ursula has provided crucial support to politicians, boards and government department heads during some intense periods during her career, earning a reputation for resilience and as an EA that can handle the heat. Ursula has an exceptional capacity for organisation, multitasking and prioritising. Ursula is someone who is determined to raise the bar in providing the highest levels of customer service. She understands exactly how vital an effective EA can be for their manager and their organisation. And she is passionate about encouraging other EAs to understand their organisation, nurture relationships in and outside the business, learn and develop, and create a can-do, solution-focused attitude. Ursula was born in Canberra. She is the youngest of 6 children. She completed a diploma of business management early in her career. She has lived on the Sunshine Coast in Eastern Australia, but she prefers Canberra. Ursula loves to enjoy a cocktail or two, loves fashion, and believes that there's more career in her left that hasn't yet been explored. Well, I cannot tell you how much of a thrill it was to have Ursula on the podcast. Given that this podcast has been going for just over 6 years now, having Ursula Kohler on the podcast would be definitely a high watermark for me in terms of my podcasting career. Ursula is an absolute role model of mine, not just in her capacity as an EA, but also in terms of what she has built with Capital EA. As the founder and director of that organisation, Ursula has built this organisation that I am constantly shocked and amazed by how many assistants in Australia, particularly in the public sector, are still not aware of Ursula and the contribution she makes, specifically in the area of executive assistant, coaching, mentoring and training. You know that those are things that I do. They are things that I do as part of my EA career. But I am the first person to point people in the direction of Ursula when I feel that Ursula is the right fit. Because what Ursula brings to the table in terms of her deep knowledge and understanding of the public sector environment, as well as her depth of experience and knowledge and capability of what it means to be a linchpin assistant, means that I want people to know about Ursula, and I want you as an assistant to be listening to this podcast and thinking, thank you, Liz, for introducing me to Ursula, because I need some Ursula Kohler in my life. That is hopefully something that some of you are going to be feeling after you've listened to this episode, and that will make me very happy. So with no further ado, here is my very long, and I make no apologies for that, interview with Ursula, because I wanted to get all of the gold from our conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. And thank you, Ursula, for giving me your time. Hello, I'm Liz Van Vliet, and welcome to the Assist with Impact podcast. Join me as I explore the competencies and capabilities that allow you to assist with impact. I'll be sharing practical tips, strategies, and insights that will help you move beyond what I call the order taker zone and be that little hinge that can swing big doors. If you're ready to be more proactive and have more impact in your role, then this is the place for you. Let's get started with the episode. Well, hello, Ursula Kohler. Welcome to the Assist with Impact podcast. It's lovely to have you here.
So lovely to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Liz.
It's my pleasure. You have been on my podcast guest list from the very beginning, and I'm so excited that we were finally able to make it happen. So thank you for making the time.
So am I, and you're on my list too, by the way. It's a vice versa situation.
We're going to do a pod swap. That's lovely. Well, I am thrilled to have you here, and the listeners will have heard in my intro why you are somebody that has always been on my list of ideal podcast guests, because, you know, we are in a global world and there's so many people out there that assistants can connect with and get, you know, use for their own self-directed learning and development. But, you know, whilst we're global, we're still very local. And so it's so lovely to be able to share you, who is somebody that is such an absolute shining light in Australia and, you know, down under, in terms of not just your expertise and you being a total, you know, subject matter expert in the area of building strategic partnerships with whoever you're supporting, but also in terms of being somebody that has grown and scaled a business doing that. You know, and that is something that I think, you know, you would know this as much as I do, that so many assistants, you know, they may be looking for something to do when they're no longer wanting to be working for the organisation, you know, finishing, you know, another part of their career. So you're just such a great role model, and it's lovely to have you and give people the opportunity to hear your story.
Oh, look, I'm just so grateful, and I still pinch myself, you know, when an introduction like that grand is spoken, because I feel like I've just been doing what I naturally need to do in life, and yes, it has been some years, but I feel very passionate still about the role today, and I think that's the key, is that I don't think I could do what I did, including, you know, making a business out of what I did in my full-time role, essentially bringing it into a commercial business, without really loving what I do and lasting this long. So it's just wonderful to be able to be here in this space now to share with others. And
that's great.
Keep enticing and motivating others to do what they love doing. So.
Exactly. Well, let's start off by listeners to the podcast know that I love to get people to share their experience navigating what I call the career spider frame. And I'm sure you will agree that it's never linear. It's never just like a ladder. We climb up or we climb or we fall down. And I love to get people to tell listeners what their experience has been. Where did you start? What moves have you made? And where are you and how have you arrived at where you are today? So I'd love you to do that for me.
I'd be very happy to. So Liz, look, it all started in my my backyard, actually. Back in the day, I had an entrepreneurial father, and he had a business that he ran from the back of our home, our family residential home. And he had it was a business that involved selling of souvenirs. So my father's Austrian immigrant parents and my mother's Russian, and he loved those kangaroos and stuffed toys and things like that. He was also a professional photographer and made postcards around the world, actually. He published books and did various things. So he had a number of things in his office, and one of them was an order book, which had 3 sheets a duplicate and a copy page.
Well, weren't those the days?
They were. And
carbon paper.
Carbon paper. And so I would often find myself in his office, and what would I be doing was filling in fake order forms and just loving the process of the paperwork. And, you know, I'd muck around with these for days, and I'd play, you know, get all the pens out, and I love stationery. I love the notebook. I love filling in forms. I mean, who loves filling in forms and answering the questions on there and making all these phony things? And I later reflected, when I thought about when did my love for office work and processes and systems really come into play? And it came in quite young. I'd put it back to at that point at the age of 10. So I knew there was something there. And then it sort of continued, and I went into immediately working part-time at the local medical centre. And I was straight on the desk, and I loved the people. I started to form relationships with, obviously, the clients and patients that were coming through. And then from there, you know, did some study. I did a diploma of business management, and then I thought, well, we'll get into somewhere else. I went into a school. I was the school secretary at the ripe age of nearly 19. So sometimes, you know, having to overcome a few similar age groups coming in and saying, I feel sick, and me having to say, oh, you just want to get out of class. But I had a very big role then as school secretary at a very high-end private school in Canberra, and I learned some fundamentals there from the school secretary and the secretary's EA at the time on how to manage processes, systems and people, and they were very strict with the way that they trained me. And I think the essence is that, in fact, most of my journey, Liz, has involved working with some very, very, you could say, passionate but also hard individuals. And I think it wasn't the easy people that I worked with that I learnt the most. It was actually the most difficult people that I worked with that I actually learnt the most out of this role. So sometimes we get gun shy and run away from those that give us a hard time, but there's others that I've fallen into the lap of that I've thought, you know what, I'm going to see whether I can really achieve what their expectations are, because that's going to help me grow. There were times in roles that you can, you know, get to the point where you think, I've done everything, what else next? Well, go work for someone tough and you'll find you've got extra to give in those roles. So from that point on, I just went in, I kept going. So I literally jumped into a legal secretary role. I worked for the Key Council. We also worked for the Chief Minister's office at the time, who was dealing with a big matter here in Canberra, that a young girl had lost her life through the implosion of the Canberra hospital. And the case was quite heavy. And so again, I found myself working with some pretty intense periods in my life. And I think my bio describes my life in the EA role as working in very intense roles at the right time, and, you know, being at the right time at the right place, because it just meant that the light was shone on our area every time I worked with someone. I got into, from the ACT government, I got into the federal government and just continued along my journey, and my trajectory started to come through. So I was sort of handpicked or tapped on the shoulder. Could you come over here and do this? Could you do that? And I was asked to go and work for Amanda Vanstone up at the House and prepare and coordinate her fact sheets at the time. But I also
was she minister for? Was she a minister at the time?
Family and Community Services.
Right.
That's now the DSS banner. So
yep.
The Department of Social Services, and that was all the parenting payment and the dole back then. But, you know, obviously job seeker and job keeper, those sort of things. So she was someone that was under the Howard government, and we required to do, you know, that working for her was another, you know, very tough person, but equally very passionate. Often tough people are very passionate about what they're doing. That's where I kind of summarize those individuals, and it's never a bad thing. So picked up a number of skills from her, and then moved on from there. Well, you know what, Liz, I then moved to Queensland, and I
saw that. I did not realise that. So you spent some time, am I right in saying, up around Noosa?
Yeah. And everyone said, why did you return? And I said, well, simply, I preferred Canberra, and I was a little too young to settle into the place forever. I found it was a little bit, at that time, a retirement village for me. I found I still loved the the beauties of just being able to go down the road to a department store, or, you know, go to the movies and not have to drive 45 minutes and things like that. So I still love my luxuries like that. And at that age, I think I could go without now. But, you know, I did give it a go. My mother then also was diagnosed with dementia. And I, being the youngest of 6 children, was very close to her. And I decided to return. And at that time, and I've explained this because there was a number of voluntary programs I fell into as well in order to help out with Dementia Australia, and also the Brain Cancer Foundation, because they found a tumour on her brain, which ended up taking her out. But that was a good thing in the end, because she had a very strong Russian constitution, which meant that she could have survived a very long time without that. And not not great life, you know, quality. So yeah, we then came back and settled in, and that's where I found myself in another agency under the Department of Agriculture with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. And that's where I learned to work with a chairman that involved me working in his office with him. So his introduction to me was simply, here's your office. And I said, no, this is your office. And he said, no, this is yours too. And you sit there and I sit here. And I was like, oh, I'm a little bit, I'm loud, and I'm quite loud on the phone. I think here's my desk, look, it's lovely. And he thought, it's outside your office. And he said, no, you need to sit here. This is the way I work. And yeah, you're here with me. You need to hear everything I say. You need to be right here where I can just keep talking with you and get things moving. So that was interesting. Again, quite passionate about what he was doing and how he was going to do it. And I thought, well, blow it on, I'll give it a go. Well, he was probably the hardest at the end. He was kind of tapped on the shoulder, and a new minister had come in and he was told to move on. And I can say that I learnt a lot about that connection with an executive, that you feel that there was no other closer relationship I had other than my husband than him, because of the way that we worked. And it was sad, you know, I really was brokenhearted when that happened. He went back to his home, which was in Melbourne. And I remember some EAs were saying, oh, you know, you'll get over it, you know, you'll be right. And I said, well, I actually feel like I've lost half my life. You know, it's that pivotal point after working with him that I thought of the point that there was nothing here in Canberra that showed me a place that I could go that really trusted what this role did and how we went about doing it, because no recruiter understood the depth of the effort I was putting into these roles. And I say 150%. We travelled the entire Australian food bowl in delivering the guide to the basin plan. We often hit various regional territories and had the irrigators burning the guide because they were very angry with the government in taking their water supply away from them. And at the time, Australia was struggling to cope with their water. So, you know, the insights and the sides of things that I kind of learnt through these processes was just remarkable when I think back, you know, and just right time, right place again, you know, just landing those hot spots everywhere I went. So I learnt a lot about that, the cog and the wheel, and how well you can get to another level with someone when you are working that closely with them. And that was definitely a very hard knock when he had to move on. Well, I found myself being offered a role in the legal team. Ursula, would you like to be the Freedom of Information Officer? Can we move you into that? And I said, do you know what I do? And they were like, oh yeah, you're the EA to the chairman. I said, I'm not a Freedom of Information Officer. And I said, I appreciate the opportunity to work here, but I'll see how I go. And at that point, I registered Capital EA all those years ago. I said, I'm going to put something out there. And the idea was to help EAs find their match with someone and their true north, and really work with them to find the people in the organisation, the environment, the culture that they're looking for, because no one was doing that at the time. And really, there's a lot that aren't doing it today either, but at least I'm doing it. And yeah, I just sat it there and thought, let's just see where it goes. And I started to tell a few people. Well, most of the people in my network were obviously chief executive officers and senior executive, and the word spread that I was doing some sort of EA company. And then I got phone calls. Oh, so-and-so told me to ring you. Apparently you're doing some EA work. And I said, oh, no, I've registered a business and it's to help EAs find, you know, their right role. And so you can't help me? I'm really desperate. It was the SOS please, as my website will say, you know, that. And then of course I felt sorry for them and thought, oh well, what do you need done? And so this whole VA company kind of came out of that.
Isn't that interesting? So the need came to you.
Yeah, the need came to me, and because they got confused and thought she's setting up some sort of EA company. You know?
Yeah.
And then people started talking and saying, well, can you help me with my EA needs? And I thought, oh God, what, you know, and sometimes it was just literally organising a lunch or popping some things, you know, some people together, coordinating a few people to get together for a get together. And I thought, oh, look, it'll only take me 5 minutes. I'll sort something out. And then from there it grew and grew. And then all of a sudden I thought I'm gonna have to put someone else on. And I couldn't do the role of myself. But at that pivotal time, I was also tapped on the shoulder and said, look, we've got someone quite high profile that's going to come in and run our Australian War Memorial. And I said, and why are you ringing me? Oh, well, he's met with a few people and they don't have what it takes. You know, we need you to, would you mind coming in and having a chat? And I thought, well, how did they hear? Again, my network, someone said, make a ring. She's doing some sort of EA company. So it just, I thought I'll go in and meet him. And that person being said was Dr. Brendan Nelson. And,
yes.
And
so people, listeners overseas won't know what the Australian War Memorial or who Brendan Nelson is, but do you want to just give them a quick explanation? I mean, anyone that's been, you know, Australians know, well, actually probably a lot of tourists would also know it, but it's such an institution. It's one of the original structures that was in the original plan for Canberra, and it's really, it's a, you know, it's a landmark building, but it's also a landmark institution, isn't it, Ursula?
Absolutely, yes. It's well, yeah. I think it's still sitting at number 1 of Australia's place to go on TripAdvisor. First and foremost, it's a space for people to, you know, to pay their respects to our veterans and past servicemen, but it's also a museum and it is remarkable. And the space itself was completely transformed under Dr. Brendan Nelson's leadership. And he made a huge impact there. And I mean, often I used to read letters and they'd say, you know, he's found his calling. This was something in his lifetime that he continued to do. Before he came into that, he was always very, I suppose, you know, admirable of our servicemen, and he had a high level of respect when he was ambassador over in Brussels and NATO. He always went to Menengate and would pay his respect there. So this is prior to him even getting into the role. So he, for those that aren't, he was a politician as well, a senior politician. He led as the leader of the opposition to Kevin Rudd. And that's where he was more famously known in Parliament House, and for Australia's economy, that's where he sort of sat. And then he went off and did some things overseas, and then came in as director of the Australian War. So I felt that was a privilege to be able to potentially go there, and I knew that I had someone already kind of on the side with Capital EA that could help out and do the work required there. So I thought, you know what, I can't pass this opportunity up. And if he does like me and we get on, well, maybe I should give it a go. So,
and again, what I'm hearing is that was where, so there's 2 things that really are resonating, are really coming out very strongly. Is one is your networks, your, you know, deep network. But the second one is how your reputation preceded you. And I love, there's a great quote that I love, which is, something along the lines of, you know, your reputation arrives in the room before you do. And you are, I mean, that is what it sounds like is going on in so many instances for you.
Yeah, you couldn't put it in better words, Liz, because I never saw it. I never saw it, but it literally landed in the room before I did. And there's still times I think, oh, you know, that happened, and gee, I was lucky with that. And
luck had nothing to do with it.
I think, well, that's what I teach others. I always now show them, you know, that this is what do you realize, you know, the type of work you're doing? And I kind of remind them. But yes, I suppose luck had nothing to do with it. There was a lot of work, and that came from being brought up in a family that worked hard on being a real support network to others. It came from an Eastern European background as well. That was the way I was raised from my mother as well. You always respect your elders. You always you give everything first to others before yourself. And
yeah, so that
mm.
it sounds like those values that you were, that were reflected to you from your parents were a big part of your success in building those relationships and that, that standing.
So autonomously, I didn't recognize that was happening, just building up, thinking, well, this is the norm, isn't it? Isn't that the norm? Isn't that what you do?
And how do you talk about that when you're training EAs that are new to the profession and say, let's be honest, there's a lot of, I've got 3 daughters, young, whether it's young women or men or whatever gender they identify as, coming out of school these days, that, I'm using rabbit ears here, but those old-fashioned values, that I still believe, and I expect you do too, that they hold you in such good stead in all areas, but particularly when we're talking about, how as an assistant you can really elevate your impact and, be perceived as more than just an assistant. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think the biggest part on teaching that, Liz, is about recognising your true worth as well, because once you feel like you have that inner part of what it takes to give, because you have to come from a place of feeling full. You can't give from an empty bucket, right? So if things are in line and you do have an understanding of your true worth and you feel confident in that and that you feel full with your own self-love, you're going to always be able to give. And I guess that's another thing that was instilled in me. And so I reflect in my training on recognizing your self-love and where you're coming from and where that space is, because it's a no-brainer to me. You need to give from a full bucket. And in these roles, I meet EAs day in, day out that have got empty buckets, or they can't find that last drop, So some do, find that, I don't have any more drops. And it's because they've stopped loving themselves. That's I always think, well, where did you stop loving yourself? So that self-love, I don't know. I find that I've always back to myself, even if I've made an error, or I get back on the horse, or this is not right. That's because of this. I've always reflected. I've always, had this equation in my mind to sort out where things went wrong, go back, unravel it, but I'd always refill myself at the time and think, okay, got to refill. I was always capable of getting up the next day with a pep in my step. I know some, and in my coaching, I'll talk to people when they can't do that anymore. It's done. They've given it a go, but it may not be for them, because these roles are unforgiving and they're thankless jobs, really. In most cases, I wasn't expecting a thank you, but there's those that fall into it waiting for that appreciation, and they're not always going to have it, and therefore their bucket doesn't get replenished. So you have to fill it yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful message, and I really appreciate you focusing on that, because that is, unfortunately, that is the reality, as you've just, outlined, that we can wish for assistants to be given greater recognition, be given more positive feedback or feedback in general, some sort of validation. But at the end of the day, you have to be you have to fill your own bucket. You can't wait for other people to do it for you.
That's exactly right. And that's really what keeps you going. If you can keep filling your bucket, you can keep going, because you'll have that drop of water to give, So and going back to sort of those old-fashioned values, or having that representation for me, walking in the door, it came from a place of that, where I just didn't recognize it, because I never thought it was anything much that I was doing other than what I love doing. So my representation and reputation was kind of something I didn't really think about. But I've thought about it since, obviously, and being in business and doing various things. I've had time to focus on it, but it did. I feel a bit like it came a bit too easy for me. So, there's parts of business now that I've learned that there isn't definitely easy roads, but it's certainly parts of it is like, well, if you keep doing what you love doing, and I always used to hear this, oh, if you do something you love, you'll always make business. And I think, well, there is that, whatever, I'm still doing what I love, so I can still do, get on with the show at the end of the day.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, let's pivot a little bit, because one of the things that I wanted to be able to tap your brilliant mind for was in the area of being an assistant in either a government agency or indeed in a parliamentary, supporting somebody in a parliamentary role. So if when you're training assistants or speaking to assistants who are thinking of making that shift into, in Australia, we call it a public sector role, but let's refer to it just as moving into a government agency, either in Parliament or in a department, what are the things that you identify that they need to be aware of in terms of the difference in doing public sector versus private sector work as an assistant?
Well, look, the main things that I think need to be recognised up front is that you actually have permissions to work in various levels. So one thing in the public sector is you have hierarchy, and you do in private as well, but you have hierarchy on a different level, and it generally ranges from entry level, they call this Australian Public Service level 1, all the way up to EL2, which is executive level 2, and then you go into senior executive officer role. So it goes on from there. But the main thing that from private to public is recognising the hierarchy. But what comes with that is a policy that the Australian government has written. And that policy writes everything that they want their public sector people, that includes EAs, policy officers, managers, project managers, everything that's in the public sector. They have a number of leadership capabilities they want you to follow. And that is from the APS1 to the EL2 and the SES and above. And in those is 5 core leadership capabilities. And they have areas detailed underneath that give you an idea as a public servant, the responsibility, but also the boundaries you can expose your own role to. And that's the biggest thing I always recommend if people are interested in getting into the public sector. Have a look at those integrated leadership capabilities, because they actually have a number of core things that you can apply yourself in the role to do. And for me, the biggest eye-opener was actually understanding that I had more permission than I realised. So permission to, I think it's at APS, Australian Public Service Level 5, to talk to others about underperformance. There was permission to think strategically and to talk to, to contribute in a way that was strategically against the vision and goals and the strategic intent of the government. And suddenly I thought, well, yeah, EAs have got to be thinking about this, because they're a public sector person. They're employed by this big policy organisation, and therefore if I'm wanting to achieve that success and that trajectory in my role, what do I need to do here? If I'm here, what do I need to do to get to here? And that essentially really showcased so many parts of really permissions and knowledge and skills that I just didn't tap into, because I was a bit
blinkered.
Yeah, I was a bit task focused on managing this executive and forgetting about that bigger picture that I'd worked in. I'm working in an organisation that also means I can do A, B, and C, and X, Y, and Z. So that's the biggest thing, getting into the government and understanding what that looks like for you, and really aligning what your key strengths are and what your key capabilities are against those hierarchical points of the integrated leadership system. So I found that intriguing. The thing in the opposite is that you're also, you form very good communication skills. That's the thing I found, was that I didn't come from an English speaking family. So Brendan was also the former Minister for Education, and I was terrified because I thought he's going to pick up that I say things a little bit back to front, or I don't communicate the best, that I would against others. I was always very critical of my communication skills, and I thought, well, now I've been doing this for so long, maybe I'll get through. But even he taught me some major amazing skills in communication. There was a lot that I learned from him, just in the way that he wrote. He's just an amazing communicator, amazing person that writes really, really well. And obviously he's one of Australia's best speakers, public speakers. So he also, writes his own speeches and talks about how certain words need to be used. And so I learned a lot through that process. But in saying that, it was important to kind of understand the power of the written word in government, whereas I found in private, there was more about the actual verbal word, not so much the written word. There was a big difference for me, is forming relationships more so in private sector, and obviously relationships in government, but I had a very tight and knit relationship with my exec, not so much the broader scope of what I needed to look for in private sector, because there was definitely more of a commercial focus in the private sector. So I focus on relationships more so in private than I did in public.
Really? That's really interesting.
Yes. Yeah. So there's certain things that I think EAs think as well, that EAs in government may have it easier and vice versa. There's a bit of that consensus. Oh, which one's easier or which one's better? And I can safely say and confidently say there isn't any easy road with this. I think that they both have their extreme level of, making sure that they support their principal and their executive to get to where they need to be. But equally, it's about recognising both footprints as you travel through that journey. And I always refer to the footprint as understanding that implicitly for both of you. So them understanding yours and you understanding theirs, to really form a great, tight, trusted relationship together. And that's across both sectors. That was the thing that I've really, I suppose, harnessed, is the footprint, where that network is. How I think, well, if you've referred to the spider frame, I'm sort of referring to a footprint in that it is very much that weaving of potential people and their backgrounds and where they've been and what did a successful year feel like for them in the past, and who are their critical stakeholders, and who's been along for the ride, who's been someone you've known for 10 years and who's still important to you now, and why.
And you ask that, and are those questions that you ask overtly?
Yeah, I do. I always say, look, I need to start with opening up on your footprint and tell me a bit about yourself, tell me about your background, and tell me about what success was for you, and how did that feel, and how did you get your Order of Australia, and what did that mean, and how did your family come into this? I asked lots of
that is fantastic.
Yeah, I did. I always did. In fact, with Brendan, he said, I feel like I've been in the interview, not you. But I was like, well, I need to be sure that, I'm going to be able to support you, because if I'm uneasy about something, I'll also let you know. I won't go for it. But of course, what you're getting here is someone that is happy to, go the extra mile to help support your footprint, because with that profile as well. And someone particularly, you're not just supporting the individual behind the desk as the director of the Australian War Memorial, you're actually supporting his entire career history at that level. So in the private sector, you're supporting their past relationships. In business, for instance, if I didn't continue to invest in my network and my past footprint of who they were, they wouldn't be here with me today. But they all are, they're there because I invest in them. I make sure, we continue with a long-term relationship.
Yeah, but what you're describing there in terms of the way you were aware of that, in terms of, whether it was Brendan or any of the other people that you supported, it sort of makes me think of this idea, which, I often talk about, of, seeing yourself as an EA, as an ambassador for the person that you're
supporting, because in the same way as an ambassador in a, in a diplomatic sense is out there representing the country that they're an ambassador for, you're doing the same thing as an EA, supporting, you're supporting somebody, you are their ambassador out into the world. You're, as often the first interaction that people have with somebody is through their EA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So true, Liz. And, it's you have to be sure that that's right for you. And I teach that in our recruitment that we do today, is that make sure that you're responsible for 50% of that relationship and how you're going to really interact with them. So if you don't ask those questions, how do you know that you can give 50%? How do you know that? So it is very important. So that representation needs to be there, obviously, and being that ambassador, is partly taking on the fact that you're happy to work arm in arm with them and really be able to represent them in a way that's going to continue to highlight and showcase them.
Now, I want to come back to when you talked earlier about, the working for people that are both passionate and challenging. You use the word hard, but passionate and challenging, and that can be, they can be very tough people to support. I'd love it if you could tell me something, just reflecting on, one of those relationships and an incident or a situation where something didn't go well. If we think about the fact that as an assistant, I know, I'm sure you do too, but I often, one of the themes that I talk about is assertiveness, is being assertive, and being, that assertiveness is about, it's about that fine balance. Like I describe it as being on a seesaw, in a playground. It's like, you need to be able to balance between being too passive, being aggressive, but assertiveness is in the middle. So can you talk to me about those relationships and a time where you had to be assertive?
Yes. Oh, God, I'm not sure I can share it on a podcast. Look, there has been, and I tell you, it didn't come without overcoming fear to get there, but I considered the conversation incredibly important to have in order for me to stay true to what I needed to do in the role. I was first and foremost business focused, and if I knew I couldn't achieve what I needed to in the role, it gave me the strength to say, well, if I'm not ticking that box, I need to be courageous here and ask how we're going to get on here or what's going to happen here. And look, I've been known to work with some of the toughest people that are in both government and private sector. And, I think that came from a space of really being really authentic and genuine and saying, look, I'm genuinely concerned here, or can I just touch base with you about this, because I'm not able to kind of work through this. And I think if I'm not able to, I can see that it's going to affect me, because it's going to affect my business and the way that I support you. So I've always had some tricky conversation with most of my executives, but every time, and I teach people how to overcome fear, to have those conversations. I led from an unemotional space in terms of I never wavered on being emotional. I just led with the fact that I had a business transaction in my roles to deliver, and I was serious about doing that to the 150% quality that I wanted to give. And therefore it came from a space of, we need to fix this and find a solution in order to move ahead, because I found that was probably the best things that I've ever done in order to work with those individuals, the challengers, to be able to really then gain further trust in them coming a little bit closer to me, knowing that, okay, well, she's prepared to say that, she's prepared to stick it out, so let's move on, let's get going here. And it did ingrain a stronger relationship from having those conversations. So
I love that. Thank you, Ursula. You've made so many, great points there, but that you know, the fact that it actually, you know, served to strengthen the relationship, you know, and it does take courage, and you're obviously a courageous person. But the way all of those brilliant points that you just made about, you know, being able to externalize the emotions and do it from a place of, you know, being pragmatic, not, you know, being emotional about it. They are all such good lessons.
Yes, look, and that's it. You know, it is about that at the end of the day. And again, if you're true to yourself about what you want to achieve, and, you know, again, that resonated with me was getting the job done. And if I felt like, well, this might not actually help me here, I'm going to have a tough conversation. It just made so much sense. But it took a lot of you know, internal, you know, practice and thinking, well, how will I raise this? I do have some funny scenarios. One was a former exec that I kind of trapped in the car, and thought, right, he can't run away, so I'll grab him now. And I thought I'll have the conversation with him in the car as I was driving him to his appointment, and he had nowhere to go, so he had to kind of listen. And I said, you know, I really want to do this, and this is how we're going to do it. This is the way I think we can work through this, and I think we haven't met eye to eye on some of these things. And, you know, and he was stuck in the car, so I thought, well,
that's fantastic.
Hopefully he can't run away or say, oh, look, you know.
But you know what's so... That's so great, because aside from being trapped in the car, what that also is, you know, and I know you've got kids as well, but like, you know, there's nothing better with a teenager than having a difficult conversation or a courageous conversation when you're driving, especially when they're driving, because, you know, it's like they don't have to make eye contact with you. And sometimes you can get the best things out of people when they're not having to make eye contact with you.
You know, I've never thought about that, but it could be why I chose that option, because he wasn't actually very comfortable with conflict and with resolving things. So I never thought about that. I may have worked it out that way, Liz, but you're quite right. It could have.
There you go. Well,
so
well done you, because that's such great wisdom. Thank you to share with the listeners. Thank you. Now, I also would love you just to close the loop for us, because it sounds like you were describing how Capital EA sort of grew organically whilst was it when you were supporting Dr. Brendan Nelson? Okay. And so tell us about what that transition to it no longer being a side hustle, but a full-time hustle. Tell us about that.
A lot of hours, blood, sweat and tears. I would finish my role. Plus, I also had my mum living with us with dementia. So she moved in with us. So at that time, I had Brendan Nelson as an executive. I had mum who's Russian, had started talking native tongue as well, with severe, you know, dementia and a brain tumour. And I'm
very sorry about that too. That must have been terribly hard.
It was hard. It was, Liz. It was hard. And I had a business that I sort of started along with, you know, a young daughter and a husband. And to say that I wasn't stretched to the limit is an understatement. It was after mum died and then moving and doing various things, I realized, wow, it's not until you kind of remove some of those heavy lifting things that you realize that was actually really, really hard. And how did I survive? What on earth? Anyway, but essentially I'd get home from Brendan. I used to feed mum, put her in the shower, I'd scrub her back and get her all washed and ready, give her her meds, put her to bed. And then I'd jump onto the spare room office, you know, computer, and I would do my Capital EA work. And that, I won't lie, there was sometimes I would be still up at 4 a.m. doing that work, and I would walk the dog at 4 a.m. to unwind, because I was quite highly, you know, I suppose I couldn't go to sleep. You know, I was kind of wired, but I had so much something in me driving me that I found it really hard just to, you know, not do the work. Today I would struggle. I couldn't do what I did back then. I'd simply go to sleep for 2, maximum 3 hours, and I'd be back with Brendan at 8:30 in the morning. And I did
Wow.
that for a good, at least 2.5 years. And then when Mum passed, I remember thinking, oh, I've got so much more time now because she's passed, and the support provided to her can now go. And I thought, yeah, I was really, yeah, I felt the jump, as you say. It was only about a year after Mum passed, I felt like I had more time, and I thought, you know what, I can actually now put in more effort, more time. Mum would be really proud of me if I got this off the ground. I said, and I manifested, and I visualized one client that would help cover what I was earning in my government salary. And Brendan, of course, knew all about my business and everything like that. So he always was supportive as well. But I always said to him, look, if I can get this one client that could really cover what I was earning in my salary, I would leave, and I would get on with it and then grow the business. And I remember physically reflecting at the end of every day saying, okay, I've done this, done that, and I've got to think about this one client. I've got to think about this one client. And this one client walked in. She was a high net worth individual. She contacted me again through my network. Someone had said, ring Ursula, she can help you. She just lost her husband. I lost my mum. She lost her husband. He was to dementia. He did all the bills, the invoices, she said, I have no idea what to do. Apparently you can help me. And I said, yeah, okay. So it was bigger than Ben-Hur when I thought about it later, because anyone in that private sector and the high net worth family office type environment, you soon learn. I had to draw up an org chart for all the various companies and entities that her husband and her had grown over the years. And fascinated me. And I said, look, I can work on this, and this, and, how about we work? He really did a lot in that space. So I took up her late husband's role in really helping her continue to deliver the needs that she needed. And she was eternally grateful. And I knew then that I must have had some sort of amazing network and backing from people, because she immediately gave me access to her bank accounts and said, yeah, these are how you have to pay the bills, and you have to go through my bank account. And I remember thinking, who does that? But it was his good word, the individual that recommended her. It was his good word that said, look, I wouldn't put anyone in there that I didn't trust implicitly.
Wow.
And and again, that I never thought about it till later. I thought, I just got on and paid. I knew the bills had to be paid, so I paid them. But I didn't think later, she gave me access to a bank account. She doesn't even know me,
Wow.
So she walked in, and I said, I think it's time for me to go. And he said, Brendan said, yeah, you know what? I think you're ready. And I was like, yeah. So since then, he sent me every bloody man and dog to the office to help them. And I'm like, not everyone, Brendan, but it's been the journey of a huge transition. I literally say I've replicated what I did in my job in my business today. So we have 5 arms of service, and they're all under the executive support banner. One is obviously helping EAs find the right fit for them. And
you're like a matchmaker.
It's called the selection and matching process, talent matching. We provide board secretariat, because I don't know how many EAs out there I meet that just absolutely hate minutes. I used to hate them. They used to take far too much of my time. So we provide a board secretariat service, and we use individuals that are graduates from the Australian Institute of Company Directors. I always recommend, if EAs do love minutes, that they take up a certificate under the Australian Institute of Company Directors, because it just gets you so much further in life if that's what your thing. We provide obviously the training and development, and again, all of these things I did in my job. I always trained others. I always paid it forward. I always shared information that may be helpful to my EA network. I encouraged others to get up and do things in their career to make them feel confident and secure, and fill that bucket of self-love. I always did that in my role. So we provide training and development, and that's my gig, wholly and solely. The other team, look after the various other arms. And then the coaching side of things and the concierge service. So the concierge is the PA role. It's doing the things that a lot of EAs do in their role to look after their principals or executive, to help them, do what they need to do in their personal lives. And it could just be small things, but we had to drag it out and call it a concierge service in the
Yeah.
so,
and as somebody that has benefited from your concierge service, I can highly, cannot recommend it enough. So yes, I can highly recommend it.
And I guess, the concierge service is lovely because you're making people feel good. And,
yeah.
You're making people happy, and it's the fun part of our role, really. I forgot to mention the virtual EA work. So we're still going, the virtual EA and in-person support, just in a short packages of particularly for those sort of high-level exec that just need some help every now and again. We provide that kind of level of support for them.
Great. Well, I will have all of the links in the show notes for people to connect with you. But I also, you didn't mention something that I loved how you talked about the way you pay it forward, because you absolutely do that. And if we're talking about ambassadors, you are an ambassador, single-handedly. But you also have the Lead EA network, don't you?
Do. That's a sister company here. Yeah, we call it the sister company because it's not commercial. It's 100% not for profit. It's a space that I was approached several times over the years. Ursula, you should set up a network. You should set up a network. And I was like, look, I've got enough on my plate. But I said, if there's some people that are keen to get on board and form a steering committee, I said we can progress that way. So we did, and suddenly people came out of the woodworks, and that Lead EA network was launched in 2020 in Canberra, and we're looking to launch this financial year in Melbourne, and then hopefully around the country. We'll just do it in stages that I can physically possibly be at each one and go from there. And it's exciting. It's a space that has 3 categories, and the categories, there's subcommittees that are in the space, and that is looking at EAs that are just coming into the career. So we have EAs that have just come into the career on our committee to say, these are the type of events, this is the sort of training we need, and this is the kind of stuff we need. They're advisors, so the volunteers are advisors. They don't have to help. We found that the biggest bugbear with voluntary type steering committees is that they give too much time and they burn out, and then they say, oh, the group's over. This is more about, we need your advice. We want your authenticity, your genuinity in saying, this is what we need as a new EA in the industry. It's both public and private sector. And that was important for me. I was like, we're just not public sector only, we're also private sector. So those EAs will go together and work on, oh, let's do this. This is what we find. Then we've got EAs that are sort of from the 3-year to 10-year mark that say, look, this is what I need. And it's different to the ones that are 0 to 3 years. I need. And
interesting.
I'm looking at things like this. I need events that have these sort of people at them, and I need development on this. And they give us advice as to what they need in their point of career. And then we have our senior 10-year plus EAs that, some of them are sitting at 20 years and more, and they say, do you know what, I'm almost at the point where I could go back to the beginning and try something else and say, look, let's start part-time or do something else. But I'm ready for something different. So they like very different events to the ones of the 0 to 3 year range. And they prefer, other things that can, of more connective point and long-term relationships and things in that space. So it was important for us to categorize them and break it down to what the career journey looks like. And then, really work with them as to what would be good as an event. They each also have leadership capabilities, and they learn skills in coming on board. I always say do it for a minimum of 12 months and then lead an event. You'll get your public speaking profile out there. If this is something you're passionate about, then you'll form all sorts of relationships with all sorts of walks of life. So it's a great opportunity to do that. And then, decide whether you want to stay on after 12 months or, we refresh and renew and have someone else come in and give us their advice.
That's fantastic. I love that. I love how you're tailoring it to the different, where people are on their career spider frame. That's brilliant.
Yeah,
and in terms of their expertise and what they're looking for. That's great. Well, Ursula, I have absolutely loved talking to you. And I just want to, remind everyone that all the links will be in the show notes, particularly for those Australian listeners. I know that, Ursula, you've got some your signature program running around the country. So I will put the links in the show notes for people to go and have a look at that. And yeah, cannot recommend highly enough. You're just such a great font of wisdom as we've heard you outline today. So thank you so much for being with us. Now, I'd like to finish with just one final tip that you would like to share with the listeners for how they can assist with impact. So I know I think I'd made you prep 3. So feel free to give me 3. But if you've got a favourite one.
That's right. I was just looking. I thought I wrote down some things because I did it. Well, I suppose the strongest point into make an impact is try to do a tricky job task. So try to do a tricky thing without having to get guidance from your executive.
Okay, that's a good one. That is good.
Try to do it on your own. That's probably where I think I had the biggest impact, was always thinking I'm going to do this without having to really seek guidance. I'm going to give it a go. And if it's wrong and you find something didn't work out, fall on your sword. I tried to do this without guidance, but I really, think it was important for me to make the judgment and the decision, because if you do get it right, I can tell you 95% of you will get it right. It'll help grow your confidence and give you that self-love back that you need in the role.
What a beautiful message to end on. Thank you, Ursula. That is such a great tip. That's gold.
My pleasure, Liz. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love talking with you, and hopefully we'll hear you soon on our podcast.
Oh, I would love to do that.
Such a wonderful advocate and ambassador for the roles and the work you do, Liz. It's really appreciated.
Thanks, Ursula. Thank you. Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see the show notes, head over to my website. It would be great if you haven't already done so. If you enjoyed the show, if you could kindly go to iTunes and leave a review. It helps other people find the show. Thanks for listening and have a great week.